Okay, thank you very much for coming. My name is Herman Kelly. I'm press officer for the EFDD group. We're here for the press conference for Mr. Nigel Farage, MEP, and I'll just let him say a few words, and then we'll have questions after that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Herman, thanks. Good morning, everybody. The 23rd of June. Well, in one way, it was unremarkable, because all the United Kingdom did was to vote to become a normal country again. Normal countries have their own parliaments, make their own laws. Normal countries have their own courts. Normal countries control their own borders and decide who can come and live and work and settle in there. But, and you could argue that there are already 183 countries in the world that celebrate Independence Days, and that all we did was to become the 184th. But I guess it wasn't quite as simple as that, because what was achieved on June the 23rd was a remarkable victory for the little people, ordinary people, decent people, against the big corporates, the big banks, big politics, wealth, power. And that was why it was a remarkable victory, because Project Fear, or even Project Threat, that we saw during the campaign, did frighten an awful lot of people. Despite that, we've won. I'm sorry to say that in the United Kingdom, and perhaps too here in Strasbourg, there is a fair bit of division in the air at the moment, but the result is the result. We're not going to have a rerun. This is not going to be like Denmark or Ireland. It isn't going to be like the Netherlands or France, where they were basically ignored back in 2005. This result, I'm certain, will stand. And I'm certain that we are going to leave the European Union and get back our sovereignty. As to what deal we negotiate will depend to a very large extent on who becomes the next British Prime Minister, a process that is ongoing as we speak. And a process, of course, that will be decided by the members of the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom. For my own part, I think we've got an incredibly strong hand. And I say that because, actually, the deal that the UK currently has with the EU is a rotten deal. You know, what we joined 40 years ago, in a world of high tariffs, one could argue gave a significant business advantage. But in a world where tariffs have come down, to pay a big daily net membership fee of £34 million a day, to have the untrammelled free movement of people, to be prohibited from making our own trade deals with the rest of the world, but perhaps worst of all, to be stuck inside this outdated customs union that means the 88% of the British economy that is not exporting to the EU is still bound for the same rule book. For all of those reasons, Britain's current relationship is rubbish. And I hope we see a strong Prime Minister that recognises that in the commercial world, it is the customer that is king, and we are the customer, we are the buyer. The trade deficit between the UK and the EU is now approximately 70 billion sterling every year. And with elections coming up next year in France and in Germany, I would expect to see German car manufacturers and French wine and champagne producers putting big pressure during that electoral process for a common sense deal to be reached with the United Kingdom. If no deal is reached at all at the end of the Article 50 process, and if we do revert to what is the worst case scenario, namely WTO and tariffs, even that is better than where we are now, and we'll be free to do our own thing with the rest of the world. So I'm happy with the result. I'm bullish about British prospects, but I do think we need to explain to a lot of the young people in Britain that we haven't left Europe. All we've done is to leave behind a failing political union, and we will continue to go on holiday and have student exchanges, and life will carry on, you know, totally sensibly, but we'll do so as neighbours with each other, not part of the same union. And I think it's very irresponsible of people like Bob Geldof and Tony Blair and others to effectively say we should ignore this referendum result. That simply isn't going to happen. And I do feel that our result offers a beacon of hope to movements right across the European Union. And it's fascinating to see opinion polls now in Denmark, suggesting that in a referendum there they may well vote to leave. In the Netherlands, similar. The Czech Republic, even in Italy, there was an opinion poll that showed 48% of Italians would now vote to leave the European Union. Either way, nothing is ever going to be the same again. I do believe that this project, the European Union project, is now dying. And we've got some big red letter days coming up already. The 2nd of October, for example, when the Hungarians vote on migrant quotas, when the Austrians rerun their presidential elections. The other feature that you will see over the course of this summer is the Eurozone crisis is back, not just with the next round of Greek repayments coming up over the course of the next few weeks, but with a deteriorating and I think pretty worrying situation in the Italian banking sector, where the red lights are flashing pretty clearly. I, for my own part, as you will know, have stood down as leader of UKIP in the United Kingdom. I won't be leading the party into the next sets of national domestic elections. I've done that because I came into politics from business. I'm not a career politician, and I think I've done my bit with getting a Brexit vote in that referendum. But I will see my time out here. We will oversee, once Article 50 has been triggered, the negotiation process to see how it's proceeding. And I do find myself now freer, and I will be working with parties and political movements across the rest of Europe who are looking to get their independence back too. I know there's been a huge demand this week to do interviews with all of you, and I just haven't got the time to do it, hence the press conference, and I'm happy to take as many questions as I possibly can.
So just for myself, I'd like to say I'm immensely proud to have been a part of, along with UKIP, of what they've achieved. As an Irishman, I've kind of like a foreign battalions, and I'm very proud of it, and hopefully, as Nigel says, nothing will ever be the same again in the European Union. So just just to set out the ground rules, only taking, because it's a press conference, I'm only taking questions from journalists. So if you put up your hand, please, state if I call you, if you state your name, your media organisation, and also whether your media organisation receives any money from the European Union.
Quite right. Yeah. Quite right. So you're in trouble.
Fiora.
Catherine Fiore, EU reporter, and we do not receive any money from the European Union.
Very good.
Today, you've described this victory as a victory for ordinary and decent people. But don't you think ordinary and decent people deserve a debate that was based on facts and not lies? One of the most preeminent lies in this discussion was the €350 million per week that will be going to the NHS. A lot of people feel sorely deceived that they were lied to on this point. It may not have been a point that was made by the Leave.eu campaign, but there were other lies, there were other misleading facts.
Okay, we'll take that question.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, the 350 million a week gross figure, actually it's higher than that, but then there's a rebate and then there's money that comes back. And I think, you know, I've said all the way through, I think it was a mistake for the official campaign to portray it in that way. They didn't need to do that, because even after the rebate, and even after the money that comes back, whether it's for agriculture or regional development or research, even after all of that, you know, net, unarguably, in the government's pink book of statistics, it's £34 million a day, £10 billion a year. So they didn't need to do that. Are we going to be better off? Will we have more of our own money to spend? Yes, but I think it was a mistake to have gone down that route, which is why I never chose to do so myself in the campaign. However, when it comes to lies, I don't think that either Vote Leave or Leave.eu, you know, frankly, got anywhere close to what we were told by the Remainiacs during this campaign, namely that you cannot have access to the single market without the free movement of people. That was the line that was put again and again and again. And there may be one or two of you in the room that still believe that, and we'll deconstruct that over the course of the next 10 minutes or so. You know, every country in the world has access to a single market. In fact, if you look at last year's trade figures, 1.4 trillion euros worth of goods were bought by European consumers from countries with whom there is not only no free movement of people, but in most cases there is no trade deal of any kind at all. So it is always regrettable at the end of any election campaign, at the end of any referendum, that either side, can point at the other and say they weren't telling the truth. All I do know is the one argument that did win wasn't the £350 million a week for the NHS. The one argument that won was we chose to become an independent, self-governing nation.
Okay. Thank you. Your good self.
Thank you very much. My name is Enrique Cerveto. I work for the Spanish newspaper ABC. I was trying. Well, I would like to mention your words, saying that has been a victory for normal and decent people. That is meaning that the people who vote for Remain are not decent or normal. And the other question is. Because we don't know, of course, the future, if it doesn't exist yet, but maybe you are wrong, and in a reasonable period of time, the economical situation, the result of the Brexit is not as you expect, and maybe can happen, And are you ready to ask to the people for pardon you or reconsider your opinion about the European Union in case of there is a reasonable evidence that the Brexit has been a failure from the economic point of view, for example, or social point of view?
What I meant by ordinary decent people was not the vested interests. That was the point I was making. Not part of giant industrial lobbies for whom the European Union has been one of the best things that's ever happened. I mean, let's be perfectly clear, the EU is very good for some people. And if you're a giant corporate, this is fantastic. It's the first time ever you've effectively, through the system of lawmaking via the European Commission, been able to set the rules for your own industry. And that's wonderful, because you can make it really tough for small and medium-sized competitors to challenge you in the marketplace, and perhaps pharmaceuticals would be a very good example of that. The other point, of course, from the perspective of the big companies, is that the customs union that is called the single market, as if it's some sort of soft, cuddly puppy, effectively is a protectionist club. And what it means for European consumers is cars we buy from all over the world are more expensive, shoes, bras, food, everything we buy from all over the world is more expensive as a result of being in this club. And again, it rather suits big companies to be part of something that keeps consumer prices as high as possible. Okay, to the meat of your question, what if the economics of Brexit aren't as I think they're going to be? Well, all I can say is I think the economics of the Eurozone are likely to be more troubled and more plagued than the economics of the United Kingdom. But ultimately, what the British people voted for was freedom over economic arguments. We said we don't want to be governed by unelected old men in Brussels at the European Commission. We want to be a normal, self-governing, democratic nation. And that is the argument that won this referendum. And as far as economic scare stories are concerned, well, the worst, I mean, this is the way we've got to look at this. The worst case scenario is that at the end of the 2 years, there is no renegotiation, and the German Chancellor and the French President decide that they're happy to risk hundreds of thousands of jobs in their countries, because given the net balance of trade, if trade was to diminish, there is greater risk on their side than our side. Even that worst case scenario, from an economic perspective, is better for the UK than where we currently are. And we've got the opportunity here, to go through 41 years of legislation and start to repeal laws that put massive business on Britain's 5 million small businesses. So I'm optimistic about the economics, but whether I'm right about that, whether I'm wrong about that, we have voted to be a free, independent, democratic nation, and the voters took the view that that was more important than being told they'd be better off or worse off.
Good self.
Adam Fleming from the BBC, and as you know, the Daily Politics doesn't receive any money from the EU. We can discuss that later. We can discuss that later at length. In a few years, neither you nor any other British MEPs will be here anymore. Is there anything at all that you will miss?
Oh, on a personal level, I shall miss it enormously. I've had an absolute whale of a time. I mean, if you'd said to me that I'd come to the European Parliament in the first place for this ridiculous little party called UKIP that nobody had ever heard of, you know, that would have shocked me. And indeed, the day I was elected here, I simply couldn't believe it. But to think that at the end of my time here, that they've given me seat number 20 in the plenary, and dear old Juncker sits in seat number 21. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you, really? So I shall miss the theatre, and I shall miss the drama that there's been inside the European Parliament. And also, you know, I'll miss, I guess on a personal level, I'll miss being the pantomime villain. I've just so enjoyed them all booing at me and shouting. It's been wonderful. So that part of it I'll miss. What I won't miss, and what none of us will miss, is the travelling to get here. Because if you live in Scotland or one of the far-flung parts of the UK, it's sort of 12 hours each way getting to Strasbourg and back. And I'll miss the friendships that we built and made with other MEPs. And, you know, I could say to you other Eurosceptic MEPs, but actually, you know, there are decent people in politics on both sides of every argument. So the social side of it I'll miss, but politically I won't miss it at all. And in particular, voting. You know, the system of I mean, I challenge any of you as journalists, you know, after a voting session here, just stop any MEP at random and ask them, what have you just voted on? And they will give you a very good impression of a goldfish, because literally no one knows. You know, as you walk into the chamber, you're given a sheath of papers like that, and if it's, you know, amendment number 56, you put your hand up or press a button, and that whole side of it I won't miss. What I look forward to is, I do look forward to coming back to Strasbourg, though, maybe 5 years or 10 years down the road, when this European Union ceases to exist, when we don't have flags and anthems and armies and presidents, but we do have a Europe, you know, based on the late 1940s Strasbourg-based idea of a Europe of nations through a Council of Europe, whereas neighbours will work together, trade together, cooperate together. Who knows? I may turn into the most pro-European politician of the lot by arguing for a positive alternative to this.
Sorry, yourself, please.
Arnim Snout, ARD German Television. I mean, after being for 17 ARD German Television, public TV. After being in this parliament for 17 years, you're saying now you're not a real politician and stepping down. Do you think that's an adequate reaction after triggering this referendum and leaving the others in this mess? And the second question, you were saying you want your life back. Is that the real and only reason? I mean, it seems kind of a very small reason and a very personal and maybe selfish reason compared to what has happened and what it means to Europe.
You know, the classic career path of people in politics in the United Kingdom is to go to one of the handful of top schools, go to Oxford, go and become a researcher, become a member of Parliament, and by 40, hopefully, you'll be in the cabinet. And you know, we've been led increasingly by people who've never had a job in their lives, who've got no experience of the real world, and who, from the age of 13, in some sort of geekish way, want to become Prime Minister. I'm not one of those. You know, I worked in the world of business, and I only got involved in politics because I felt there was something fundamentally wrong about the direction of the European project once the Maastricht Treaty came into being. And I looked around in British politics and I asked myself the question, who is going to have the guts to actually confront this head on? And I concluded virtually nobody. So that's why I got into it. Yeah, and you know, I'm not a career politician. I may have been here a long time. As far as my reasoning for getting out of it, well, you know, I have been doing this for 25 years. I have gone from, you know, just scraping past screaming Lord Such, who fought the record number of by-elections in Britain, even more than I've fought, and beating him by 164 votes, to being part of a campaign that got 17.5 million votes. So I think I've done what I set out to achieve in politics. And have I left things in a mess? Well, British politics is in a mess, as it should be. As it should be, because effectively, on these massive issues, our so-called main parties have merged about 3 decades ago and not given the electorate any choice at all. So do I feel a tinge of regret that there's chaos in the Labour Party and Conservative parties, not one little bit. And I'm not disappearing completely. You know, I'm still a member of UKIP. I still support the aims of UKIP. I still think electorally the party's got, you know, fantastic opportunities, particularly given the travails of the Labour Party. And if the new Conservative Prime Minister was to get a deal that was considered to be less than favourable by those that voted for Brexit, then I think as far as UKIP's concerned, I think in 2020 it could get many more votes than it's ever achieved before. It's just it won't be me leading it, but I'll be there and I'll be supporting it. But I won't be doing it 7 days a week. I won't be doing it 100 hours a week. I said I want my life back. You may think that's selfish. I think it's actually quite a rational decision that I've taken.
Okay. Self in the light pink shirt.
Didn't know it was pink. Sorry. Neil Madden from China's Xinhua news agency. I'm not party to the agency's finances, so I can't answer the second part of the question. But just going back to the subject of Strasbourg, we know that there are a number of elements, personalities within the Conservative Party who would also like, if you will, to complete the withdrawal by taking Britain out of the Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights and the European Convention of Human Rights. Do you have any comments on that as well?
Well, I think, you know, what the referendum clearly says is that we do not want the European Court of Justice to overrule our own Supreme Court. That's perfectly clear. And anything less than that was delivered would frankly be a betrayal of that vote. The referendum was not directly about the European Court of Human Rights here in Strasbourg. It wasn't directly about that. That's a debate that we'll have going down the road, but I suspect that's not going to be the top priority. I mean, I would like the relationship change, but I suspect that's not going to be a top priority for whoever becomes the next Prime Minister. So I mean, I think the attitude of the European Union is, you know, fine, Britain's left, she must leave. Where the argument's going to be, the argument is going to be, you know, are issues like the freedom of movement of people, are issues like the single market, are these to be red absolute lines for the next Prime Minister, or are we going to see some sort of sellout, as indeed happened in Norway? You know, the Norwegians in '94 voted not to join the European Union, and then without being asked, they were signed up for the single market and signed up for Schengen. So these are going to be the great battle lines of British politics, you know, over the next 2 or 3 years, and indeed may become central parts of the 2020 general election manifesto. I hope that's not the case. I hope the Conservative Party have the wisdom to choose a candidate that will trigger Article 50 as soon as is reasonably possible and recognise the strong hand that we've got, put a good negotiating team in place that includes people from other political parties to represent the vote, and indeed some business figures who actually know their way around the German car industry and the French wine industry. And I hope that we don't need to have this argument in 3 years' time that we left the EU but got a rotten deal. We'll have to see.
Ms McKiernan.
Sorry, Jennifer McKinnon from the Aberdeen Evening Express in Scotland. You'll know that Scotland now stands on the brink of a second independence referendum. How worried are you that the UK Independence Party could actually end up destroying the UK through this campaign?
Well, I don't really agree with the premise of your question. We've just voted in an independence referendum. We have voted for independence. So if Nicola Sturgeon wants to have a referendum, she'll have to vote against independence. She'll have to vote to join up with the Brussels Club, and she'll have to vote to sign a treaty that would commit Scotland to joining the euro. And that got them in trouble in the referendum back in 2014. It would get them in even bigger trouble this time round. And the other key difference is that, you know, all the economic projections that the SNP put in 2014 were based on an oil price of $113 a barrel. The last time I looked, it was $47, and even if it rallies from here, it's not going anywhere near that kind of number. So it's a great political story for Nicola Sturgeon, but in reality, I mean, I tell you what, would she really want a referendum on Scottish separation from the United Kingdom at this stage? I don't believe she would. They'd lose it by a bigger margin than they did back in 2014. I feel pretty confident of that too.
Yourself, please.
Good morning. My name is Christoph Schmid. I'm from the Dutch newspaper Trouw. Just to clarify, just a factual question about your position. I understand correctly that you resigned as a UKIP leader, but you will remain as an MEP. Is that right?
Yeah, I've stood down as the leader of the national political party, so I don't intend to lead UKIP into the next sets of national elections. And, you know, that next May we've got a round of English county elections and it goes on every year. I'm not doing that anymore, but I'm still a member of the party. I'm a supporter. I will support whoever leads it. I will continue here in Strasbourg until the end of our time because I want to be free to comment, to praise or criticise what happens once Article 50 has been invoked.
Okay. No, just sorry.
Oui, bonjour, c'est l'agence de presse d'Athènes. Voilà. Agence de presse d'Athènes. Tsipira Olympia, mon nom. S'il vous plaît, je veux prendre vos paroles aussi. Vous avez dit que le client est roi, c'est nous le client, et notre relation avec l'Union européenne était devenue pourrie. Donc, c'est évident que votre conception pour l'Union européenne, c'est le marché, c'est le business. Et je me demande, dans une conception comme ça, est-ce que votre place est là, à cette union-là, qui a été faite avec une vision de fondateur totalement différente après les deux grandes guerres qui ont causé autant de catastrophes en Europe. Voilà. Et vous avez d'ailleurs plusieurs fois mentionné que vous êtes un businessman.
Whilst it's absolutely true that the Founding Fathers, back in the 1950s, envisaged effectively a United States of Europe, and that is what people in Brussels and Strasbourg have campaigned for 60 years, the reality is that was never sold to the peoples of Europe. And certainly our country joined a common market. And in this referendum, you know, did David Cameron or Nick Clegg or Blair or Mandelson or any of them, did any of them say to the British public, this is wonderful, guys, this flag, this passport with the Euro? I mean, nobody made the positive argument for political union in Europe, because if they'd done that, they would have lost it even more heavily. So all of us have been taken into a political union with business being used as the guise. It was called the common market 41 years ago. Today it's called the single market, as if that's all it's about. So no, I've always said this project is political, and to me, the sheer dishonesty of the European Union project is that the first time that the EU was really open with the peoples of Europe about their intentions was when Giscard chaired the Constitutional Convention, and then that was put to the people in France, it was put to the people in the Netherlands. They rejected the concept of political union, and yet sneakily, through the back door, they got the Lisbon Treaty. And I genuinely do not believe there is any such thing as a European demos. I don't think actually that it exists, and I think what Britain has done is to open up the door for the end of political union. And I, you know, I will, if I'm asked to come to the Netherlands or wherever it may be, to help movements that want to get a referendum on their independence, I will help them to do so. I'm afraid I think the European project is illegitimate and that it's never been sold to the peoples of Europe openly and honestly.
Well, there's a straight answer. Political, please. Tara, I think it's the last question as well, because we're on time.
Okay. This is Tara Palmieri with Politico. I just wanted to ask you, since obviously you're resigning from your post as leader of the UKIP party in the UK, this will lower your national profile. So will you continue to use a security service paid for by the European Union while you are still working for the European Union?
I wasn't aware that I was, but thank you for telling me.
£15,000 a day. It's been reported that it costs.
No, I don't use EU security services at all. In fact, I don't even get any protection in the United Kingdom of any kind at all from the police or anybody else. It all has to be funded out of private donations.
From the last question.
Mr. Farage, you said in London that you wanted...
Could you give your name?
Eurojournalist, and as opposed to you, we don't receive any European funding. The question is, you said in London that you wanted to support other European independence movements. Does that mean concretely that you will work with Geert Wilders, Frauke Petry, Marine Le Pen in their national campaigns?
No. No, there are. It doesn't just have to be political parties. You know, and one of the inspirations for that was the referendum on the Ukraine that was triggered in the Netherlands, that was triggered by a non-party political group of young independent bloggers. And I think that if you look at that, and if you look at the way Five Star are transforming the landscape of Italian politics, I think there are other ways now to do this, using the internet and pushing popular campaigns. Okay.
Just, yeah, I'm sorry, I think I've been told we have to get out here pretty sharpish. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'm sorry that everyone hasn't been able to have an individual interview with Nigel, but please understand that the volume of requests was too high, and that's the reason we've had this press conference today. So thank you very much, and safe home.